Christian, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, there's a little bit of feedback there, but it should be fine. Thank you.
Testing, can you all hear us? All right, no feedback.
Good. Awe, washajanika, zani wawi hompe combre, kutatonga mingsha. In English, my name is Duane BigEagle. I know some of you. I am Osage Indian from Oklahoma, Hominy District, Osage. And I want to welcome you to the first of what will be many collaborations with the Native people of this area. I think I'll briefly introduce everybody and then allow because our communities are so complex, it's good to allow people to introduce themselves because it allows us to really be specific about who we are and where we're from. So Duane BigEagle is my name. This is Lorelle Ross. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, good morning. I first want to acknowledge and give appreciation to all of you for joining us today and taking the time to learn a little more about Native Americans and specifically on local California tribal people. I also want to acknowledge Professor BigEagle, who is part of your faculty and our Native community as well. For his vision and leadership in creating this opportunity with our president of the college, who reached out to myself and other panelists that you'll meet. I am representing with a fellow colleague here aside me for the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. We are a federally recognized tribe comprised of Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok people. Our ancestral area is here in Marin County. And we'll share a little bit more about our local history and connection to this campus and to the homelands of Marin County specifically, and touch on Sonoma County as well. I am the Vice Chair Emeritus. I served on Tribal Council for 28 years. I stepped off the council earlier this year to pursue some additional pursuits in my own higher education. I continue to do representation for my tribe and Native community. I myself grew up on what was the historical Great and Rancheria in Sonoma County. And I am on my grandfather's side, Coast Miwok of Marin County and Southern Pomo of the Santa Rosa Plain. On my grandmother's side, I am Mishawawappo of Alexander Valley, which is in Sonoma County in the Napa area, as well as southeastern Pomo from Dry Creek, which is a little north of Geyserville. I would be remiss to share with you my two other tribes on my father's side, which is Irish and Danish. It's my pleasure today to share with you a little bit about who I am from a personal lived experience, as well as information on our tribal community, our tribal sovereign nation, the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. And really just want to also respect and acknowledge that where we sit today is on our ancestral lands, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But it's always great to be on campus and know that we are surrounded by such sacred mountains and with beautiful landscape that reflects the culture and the endearing spirit and legacy of the Coast Miwok people and of Native American people. And to share that now with you all and with students who are really at the forefront and wanting to be agents of change and also agents of truth and justice. So welcome and excited to meet and get to know you better.
The power of diversity. And I had the opportunity to run for council when we were reestablished. And I took that opportunity because I really felt that there was a lot of people within my family and relatives that had less fortunate opportunities than I did. And that was my opportunity to promote the power of education. My grandmother was from Point Reyes, born and raised. She transitioned to Hillsburg to become a live-in maid for a doctor when she was a teenager. And then she met my grandfather. They were in Alexander Valley, and where my father was born and raised. So my connection to Marin.
Kamolish. Open to us all, Nico. So I said, hello, relatives. And I Coach Miwok dialect. And my name is Dean Hoagland. And again, I'll just say this first. I'm a work in progress. You know, I'm humbled to be here and appreciative, you know, for the invite, you know, and honored that way. So yeah, like Lorelle shared, you know, it's wonderful to be back here on, you know, always on our ancestral land. I am of Coast Miwok descent. I am the great-grandson of Maria Copa Frias. I am the grandson of Julia Elgin Frias. And I am the son of Rita Elgin Carrillo. And so my mother was born in Marshall. And that's kind of where it all began, you know, for me. And there's a whole history of my family, you know, coming, you know, from this area, you know. And yeah, it is wonderful. I just took a walk back to my car and came back and looked up to that great medicine place called Tamalpais, that mountain where, you know, our ancestors used to have ceremony, you know. And I'm a traditional person. I'm a cultural bearer of our Coast Miwok, you know, and even those pomos swept, they snuck into camp. We had relations with them. But again, it's wonderful that I can be able to say that, you know, our culture is alive, you know, and I get to participate in it. I get to share that. I get to carry that forward. Because if we might share some information about the history of our people here in California, and you'll see how amazing that is in spite of, but, you know, again, I'll just kind of end there, and again, I'm honored to be here with y'all. Kamolis.
Amenehi Hinti Katunapoi, Trulesa Barada Kalaktek. Good day, relatives. How are you? My name is Trulesa Barada, and that is our ancestral language of Lake Miwok, or Kutsa, as we say. I'm an enrolled member at Middletown Rancheria, Band of Pomo Indians of California, which is located up in Lake County. And so I'm here as a guest. I'm not Coast Miwok, although there's rumor that I have relations with Tom Smith, maybe cousins. So I was invited as the representative of a nonprofit organization called Redbud Resource Group. I'm the education specialist for this nonprofit. It's all Native led. And we're based in Santa Rosa up north in Sonoma County. And I'll talk a little bit more about what Redbud Resource Group does later on. But I was raised here in the Bay Area. I was born in San Francisco, and I went through the public education system in Novato. So I went to Lou Sutton, Sinaloa, San Marin, for anyone else who went through that school system as well. I got fellow alumni in the room. And I went to Chico State, graduated with a BA in sociology. Took some time off, about a decade, traveled the world, figured out what I wanted to do with my life. Even a decade later at 30, I still did not know, but decided to go back to school and get my MA in education, which is where I discovered Redbud Resource Group. And I just wanted to note that I am joining you in a couple capacities, as Professor BigEagle mentioned, that we want to be clear about where we come from. So I'm joining here as a representative of Redbud Resource Group, an intertribal nonprofit organization. I'm also joining as a California Indian person. That means that I am a citizen. I have dual citizenship with Middletown Rancheria. So I'm a tribal citizen, and I'm joining as a Native American person who is a guest on this land as well. Just because I'm Native doesn't mean that I can come into someone else's ancestral homeland and do as I please. I need to behave as a guest behaves. Yeah, I think that's it for me. Oh,
Oh, good. I I guess we want to start a little bit. I want to share, first of all, I want to share the moderation duties with Lorelle because she knows her community and much better than I do. But I would want to say that I'm very appreciative of your presence here. I think it's really wonderful that you've come to help us express who we are. And I want to thank the trustees that are here also, and especially President Eldridge, who trusted me for some reason. I have no idea why, but hope we've fulfilled his trust. So thank you all for coming and thank you for your attention. I might say something about my tribe. I also am a guest, as Trelissa is saying. So I'm very aware of that and on my best behavior, as everybody should be, on this ancestral land. I don't know if you've seen the movie Killers of the Flower Moon, but that movie is about my tribe. And I want to say that the Osage part of that is completely accurate and authentic. And it's a very good picture of what can happen to people and what has happened to Native people in this country. You know, in a lot of ways, you know, people don't understand how distrustful Native people might be of governments, of other individuals. And if you watch that movie, you will kind of understand why there is so much distrust and why that trust has to be rebuilt as we go along. But I think maybe I'll leave it to Lorelle to see what we should do next.
Thank you, Professor BigEagle, and all of our panelists. We've just on a quick recap, we've learned the diversity that exists within the Native American community, just right here in our little petri dish of our reality. We also recognize that there's diversity within California Indians and diversity within local tribal people, Pomo, Coast Miwok, from Marin, from Sonoma, from Petaluma. And that's, you know, a reoccurring understanding that hopefully you'll take away is the complexity, the diversity, and also the integration that is represented throughout the daily community that we're all a part of, Native and non-Native. Thank you. I want to pivot back to you, Trelissa, and have you share with us a little bit more about your work and perspective that you're doing. Also, I think as a person who grew up in Marin County, has a unique perspective that could share a little bit about what that means growing up in Marin County. So if we start there and then share with us a little bit more than from your introduction, the great work that's happening through the Redbud Resource Organization, specifically thinking and being mindful about what non-Native faculty approaches can be incorporated in understanding, and also thinking about how faculty are agents for information and community on a campus here, such as the College of Marin, in representing and teaching Native American history and culture and understanding. Just a small order.
yeah. Getting out notes. All right. So without sharing my entire life story, I should probably provide a little bit of context. As I said, I was born in San Francisco and I went through the public education system in Marin. But my story doesn't really start with my birth, although that's how I always told it growing up. It actually kind of starts with my grandpa, who went to World War II, who served in several capacities back in his hometown of Middletown, in various positions, but lived his life in fear, basically, in fear of being Indian, for being Indian, in fear of facing racism, which he faced constantly. And so it was his decision to take advantage of the Relocation Act, which aimed to move Native American people to urban city centers. And so he picked up his family, with the exception of my mom and youngest uncle, who weren't born yet and moved to St. Louis, Missouri, which is where my mom was born. Now, fortunately and unfortunately, my grandpa became very ill with complications from diabetes, and he wanted to move back home to be with his family and to be back in his homeland. And so they moved back to Middletown at that time. And so my mom spent a lot of her childhood back here in California, which is how we ended up back here. And I bring that up because although, you know, they moved back home, they still faced that racism, that constant isolation from dominant society. And so kind of fast forwarding, when my mom became older, she moved away from the reservation, which wasn't a great place to grow up, to San Francisco, which is where I was born. And I kind of wanted to start there because I usually start with my schooling. And so I wanted to kind of place that here in Marin County, just kind of to help create a picture of why I didn't grow up on my ancestral homelands, which is, you know, which is a common thing for a lot of Native people today. I think it's something like 70% of Native people live off the reservation. So I'm not alone, although at times, most of my childhood, I felt like the only Native person. And even at that, I felt like I wasn't Native enough to be Native. So being the only Native person growing up in school, not seeing any of our history or any of our culture, any of our contemporary struggles or movements or strengths being highlighted in school. And so I kind of went into my upper education knowing nothing about our history, not thinking that I was very Native, not telling people that I was Native because they would ask questions that I didn't have the answers to because I didn't grow up in our community, or just also facing blatant racism, like, where's your teepee? I didn't know you were Native. Do you have a teepee? Do you shoot bows and arrows, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, telling people that I was Native wasn't really a public thing. And I went to Chico and I took a California Indian class, and I was very excited to take this class. I thought that I would finally be exposed to our stories, be exposed to our true history, which I was kind of always told on the sideline. We faced a genocide. You know, we basically didn't survive colonization, even though we're sitting right there speaking as Native people to one another, but basically that we didn't make it. And so I thought I would hear kind of the true history, like how did we, if we didn't survive, then how are we here right now? Unfortunately, it was a very antiquated, you know, kind of cultural anthropology course where we only talked about pre-contact life, and nothing that came post-colonization. In fact, I think it was the worst grade that I got out of all my classes that semester, just, you know, due to lack of interest, honestly. But I left with more questions, which was good. So I went and scoured the internet for information on our tribe. And what I discovered was the Bloody Island Massacre. And can I see by a show of hands who knows what the Bloody Island Massacre is? Okay. I kind of expected more people to know. So you're right there with me. So thank you for that. I feel better about not knowing what it was. So the Bloody Island Massacre is one of the biggest massacres that has happened in U.S. history. It happened up in Lake County on an island called Bonaparte, in Clear Lake. And I'm not going to get into the full history of that because it'll probably take me another 10 minutes to teach you what Bloody Island Massacre is. But long story short, upon discovering that, I felt, and my people are from Lake County, and so my ancestors faced that struggle, and understanding and learning that history, I felt this new sense of pride, a sense of pride that I had never, ever known before, just from simply learning this history. And so, and gratitude. And so, you know, just the simple act of learning about the Bloody Island Massacre made me feel this pride. It made me feel grateful for what my ancestors must have sacrificed for me to be here, again, a feeling that I never ever felt. It was always, shame. It was always skepticism. It was always like invisibility. And it helped me understand why my family chose to assimilate. And it did feel like at the time, like it was an active choice with my grandpa moving to Missouri and my mom moving to San Francisco, et cetera. It made me feel like I understood that assimilation was necessary in order to heal, in order to survive, and in order for future generations to have any hope of thriving. It was at that point that I started kind of realizing that I wanted to do something in Indian country, that I wanted to give back to my community somehow. I didn't know what that looked like, in large part because no careers in Indian country were ever presented to me aside from working for tribal council or working in the casino. So I had no idea, what my path looked like. And I really, honestly, still at that point didn't feel like native enough to do anything in Indian country. So it took a while to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. But I had my son when I was 31 years old, and I realized, you know what, I don't know what the path looks like for me, but I know that I need to create a better future for my son so that he grows up feeling proud that he is Native, which is something that I did not grow up feeling. And that is really what led me to my work with Redbud. And as soon as I learned about Redbud, I started as an intern. I knew that I wanted to do something in education. And so I decided to go out and seek an Indigenous education organization or somewhere where I can do hands-on curriculum writing. And as soon as I met Taylor Pennywell, who is our executive director, I felt like I was no longer alone. Like there were other Native families who have the exact same story or a completely different story, but we all ended up in this work for a reason, which is to improve Native visibility, especially in schools, not just in schools, which is where cultural erasure is the most pervasive, but in politics, in healthcare, et cetera. And so that's what Redbud does is we help educational institutions, we help organizations, corporations, we help them partner with Native communities to bring healing back to the land together because we're all here. There's no going back to what it was. And to bring healing back to Native people who've been wronged century after century. And my part in that is to create curriculum that tells that true story, that amplifies Native voices, and that frames the conversation from a lens of survival, from a lens of resistance and resilience. And that's a lot of what I do at Redbud. And you asked a couple questions in there, Lorelle. What am I forgetting? What non-Native teachers can do? Well, let me talk a little bit about Redbud's programs. Okay.
To share some of the programs, I do want to let the audience know that we will reserve some time for questions and answers after each of the panelists are able to present and hear from you and try to answer questions. But part of the offering today is also additional resources and connect with all of the panelists who have unique and insightful and expertise that is available through the various work that we do. So I think it would be great if you could share a little more about the work specifically and resources that you all have.
Yeah, so as I said, Redbud Resource Group is intertribal, and so we don't speak for any one specific tribe. And there are more than 100 federally recognized tribes in California, and that's just recognized tribes, 110, I believe, federally recognized tribes in California alone. That doesn't include the tribes who lost their federal recognition and are actively trying to regain it back. I think there's about 50 more, so unrecognized tribes. And so at Redbud Resource Group, we use public health and education data to inform our programming. And so we kind of work to improve the overall health of Native communities. We do try to localize our teachings as best we can. So we are based in Sonoma County. So a lot of my resources focus on Pomo country, for example, but yeah, we kind of offer this intertribal kind of macro perspective to help amplify Native voices in different arenas. And so we have a couple different programs. We kind of lean onto different legs, if you will. There's myself and Taylor who kind of run the education department, and we offer professional development for teachers. We don't do a lot of kind of small training sessions. A lot of them are like, we set a date and we encourage teachers to come to us. So we hold those throughout the year in a program called Amplifying Native Voices in the Classroom. And we've typically worked with K through 12 teachers, but we've also partnered with universities like Sonoma State in the past. And then our other department is called Going Beyond Land Acknowledgements. And that department hosts master courses, we say, which works with non-Native organizations and resource districts, et cetera, to strategic plan and to use tools that Redbud has created to implement more Native involvement in their overall structures. So we have a program that we partner with Together Bay Area, which is kind of a conservation cohort of 70 plus local organizations called Right Relations to bring these orgs together who want to amplify the Native perspective, especially when it comes to land management or land stewardship, and how to go about doing that in a respectful and authentic and genuine way. And then we also create a ton of resources, hence our title, Redbud Resource Group, and they're all available for free on our website. So we have education resources available for free, and our teacher professional developments are usually based off those. So teachers walk out of the workshop with lessons in hand, ready to teach. And for university level, I would highly recommend checking out a few specific resources. I did print out a resource list that is up here on this table if you'd like to grab one on your way out, but I'll just mention our Seeing Our Native Students video series goes over a lot of Native 101 basics, what you should know if you have Native students in your class. And I will tell you right now that even though you remember my story, even though people don't tell you that they're Native, that doesn't mean that you don't have Native students in your class. So it's safe to just assume that you do. And we have a health model that we've indigenized called the Redbud Wellness Model that could be useful to use in class as you're talking, about programs that uplift Native people and strengthen our communities and strengthen our sovereignty. So definitely go check that out. And then we have a couple units, one on the California Indian genocide called Weaving the Future, Confronting the Past, which focuses on a very specific time period in California history, the gold rush and California statehood. And we have another high school unit called Ethnic Studies, erasure to revitalization. So it focuses on cultural erasure, it focuses on Native identity. Those could also be useful in a university or a college level classroom. So that is I think we do a bunch of stuff. We do a bunch of other stuff too, but I think that's a good overview of the services that we provide at Redbud Resource Group. And then suggestions for non-Native teachers about how to teach. Do you want me to tackle that right now?
That'd be great.
Okay. So there's a couple things that I think are important if you do plan to, which you all should, plan to include Native studies in your classrooms and Native studies. it's interdisciplinary. It can be integrated into any subject. And I also left business cards up here. So if you're ever looking for specific resources, please do reach out. Don't hesitate. I'm always happy to share resources. But there are a few important things to keep in mind. And you guys can jump in if I'm forgetting anything. But the first and most important thing in my mind as an educator is to please refrain from talking about Native people as if we are relics of the past. So Native people have always been here and we are still here. And so to talk about Native people as if we don't exist anymore, that perpetuates cultural erasure. At which we don't want, which, as you could tell from my story, is something that hits home pretty hard for me. Another important thing is to, as we kind of touched on, understand who it is that you're talking about. So Native Americans, not a monolith culture. We are very diverse and we use a lot of different language, as you may have noticed, when referencing different kinds of groups. And so some of you may have kind of jumped in your seat when you heard me say California Indian. I like to point out that Indian is actually a political and legal term that is used in the Constitution, and it does have it can be used in a derogatory way, and it has been used to undermine tribal sovereignty in the past. But when used correctly, it does denote sovereignty. So during the California Indian genocide, the state targeted these sovereign people who they called Indians. It's not a self-given name, but it does hold that kind of weight. Native American is typically referring to indigenous peoples of the United States, and it is more of a cultural term, unlike American Indian, which can also be used to denote, kind of like a race of people. First Nations is used to talk about Indigenous peoples of Canada. So there's a slight difference there. And I have heard Native American also used to refer to Indigenous peoples of Mexico and Central America as well. But typically when you hear Native American, we're talking about Indian country, which is also a legal term that the government uses to talk about the sovereign nations within the borders of what we now call the United States. And then you may have also heard the term indigenous. And so indigenous is always a safe word to use, a safe word to fall back on. And that just denotes the people who have ancestral ties to the place that they live. And that is a globally used term. So understand who it is you're talking about. And always remember that Native history is American history. So not only have we been here since before the arrival of Europeans, we've continued to be here, and we have been central to the development of what we now know as the United States. Okay, we actively participate. We have actively participated, and we continue to actively participate in everyday things, in the development of the Constitution, for instance. So always keep those two kind of timelines in mind together. They're not separate. Native history is American history. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You've given us a ton of resources and abundance of knowledge and a takeaway before you leave, and for sharing your personal parts of your personal story, which is always, I think, powerful to understand. That said, I just also want to acknowledge the experience and wisdom that you bring in really illuminating the story of survival and identity, and how we all have to navigate around being survivors of a genocide. With that, we are still here. Dean, you're still here. And so I'm going to pose to you a few questions to help move through the panel. We'll just kind of move up through the table here. Um, And with that, Dean, I was hoping that you could share more with all of us today and beyond your introduction about your work that you have done vastly in the local Native American communities in terms of wellness and prevention work and why that matters and how that also impacts non-native and native communities alike. And if you could also share with us your recent engagement with the organization that you founded, a nonprofit, the Tribal Council Coast Miwok of Marin, which is a local nonprofit that Dean and other lineal descendants of Coast Miwok people have organized and are doing some work behind that. So if you could share a bit on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Again, I was just teasing Sister Tesla here that she stole all my thunder, talked about everything. Like, really? I wrote it all down. And you know, I'm retired, but yet I guess you could say it's kind of, I graduated after retirement. So now I'm so busy. I'm trying to keep everything under wraps. I can't clone myself. I'll share a little bit about my story, but almost like I guess you could say I'm a professional trainer on wellness, and I almost want to do an energizer with you all. Okay. I'm kind of like, kind of feeling the room, the vibe and, the space, how we share space, whenever I present, that's what I do. And so my story is one of, again, kind of recovering from all those things, a little bit of what Tesla covered, and when we talk about the impact of, historical trauma, and those things, that come with it, based on our history as California Native people, and growing up, I didn't really experience that, until later on when, I kind of put the pieces together after I became more aware of, I just knew that we were Native, and it was the greatest time of my life, growing up with my maternal grandmother, and it's just like I'm so thankful for my grandmother. She was a trilingualist. She spoke her Coast Miwok language, she spoke English, and her favorite, she spoke Spanish. And so, but again, just what she shared with me, and what she modeled, and about what it means to not just be indigenous, not to just be Coast Miwok and Pomo, but to be a good human being, and to be caring, to be compassionate, to be loving, to be nurturing, and as an indigenous man, sometimes that can be scary too, because just in the general sense as men, I always share this, men, believe it or not, ladies, we have the capacity to be nurturing. And we do have intuition, believe it or not. Hey, try that one on. So again, learning, I tell my story, when I was younger, I was in the military. And like I said, there's only one branch, and that's the United States Marine Corps. And I'll just prop that up right away. But it's just going through it, as a younger age, just not really kind of finding my way as far as really truly finding my purpose until later on in my life, where it came down to me making the wrong choices, but yet ultimately having this what some call a dream or a vision, and where in my dream, my ancestors came to me, and one of them spoke to me and told me it's time for you to walk the spiritual path. And so from that time moving forward, that's when I made that transition to walk in a good way, or we call it many names for it. We call it the red road, the good life path, and it's all about healing. It's all about, again, walking in you know, how we were intended to walk in this life, you know, to be what we talk about, a good relative, right? And I'm working on being a good ancestor, right? And self described, I'm a welder. I'm not just an elder, but I'm a well elder. So I made that term up and, you know, shared it with, you know, many others in the field of wellness, you know, and so, you know, it's been quite a ride for me, you know, and to learn again, you know, like I said, I don't know if I said this before, but I'm a work in progress, you know, and one thing that came up for me too, again, is like, I believe in that, you know, uh, what we look for, we find. What we look for, we find. And, you know, I prayed for, you know, this life. You know, I asked the Creator, you know, I put people, places, and things in my life that will guide me on this path. And man, it's been a blessing after blessing, you know, because, you know, again, we're facing our tribal communities, we're faced with a lot of those things, you know, from that historical trauma, that genocide, the alcoholism, the drug addiction, the abuse, right? You know, those things around discrimination, racism. You know, I want to share this quick story too about, you know, like I said, my grandmother was Coast Miwok, and I was told that by my mother that my grandmother used to, you know, speak her Coast Miwok language to her oldest children, but my grandfather reprimanded her. And he told my grandmother, I don't want you teaching my children that language. And it was only because of the discrimination and the racism he faced as a young Pomo man. And he was from the Habemapo Pomo, which is called Big Valley Entry in Lake County. Yeah. So, and, you know, and when I hear that story, you know, I'm like, wow, it'd been nice, you know, again, to learn that language directly from my own family, you know. But the beautiful thing, you know, that I learned is that, you know, if we can speak any of our language, our culture is alive. You know, when we sing those songs, when we dance in those roundhouses or those arbors, you know, our ancestors come alive, you know, because we are connected to them, you know, and especially in these sacred spaces. Lorelle mentioned, you know, again, that there's, you know, all these places are villages throughout Marin County and again, Southern Sonoma County, which, you know, all our, you know, Coast Miwok people come from. And again, we had relations. Again, my grandfather was Pomo, you know, and then on my father's side too, I'd be amiss to not mention my father from Round Valley Indian Reservation in Mendocino County, Yuki and Wailaki. Yeah, and I always like to, you mentioned that too, you know, and pay tribute to my ancestors. Yeah, and there's some Irish too that snuck into camp, believe it or not. How many Irish have we got in here? Any Irish? Yeah, see? Yeah, yeah. And it's because of our challenges, it's all because of our Irish ancestors. No, I'm just kidding. But so I just retired, like I said, from Indian Health Service. I've worked 30 plus years in more in the behavioral health, mental health field, you know, in many roles, you know, as direct services, you know, as counseling, and also, you know, that was, you know, when I first started, that was my purpose, to be of service to my people. I was told later that that's the one thing, you know, the greatest role we can have as an Indigenous person is to be of service to our people, you know, and right before I retired last year, the program I worked for too, by the way, is called the Aunties and Uncles Program. It's a youth suicide prevention program because, you know, unfortunately in the Indigenous community, we have one, if not the highest rates of suicide, youth suicide in the country. You know, and again, a lot of those, you know, health disparities we speak of, you know, Native people have the highest rates, diabetes, right? So many of it. But anyway, I want to share the story. We're coming back from an event, and in front of I worked at Sonoma County Indian Health Project in Santa Rosa. That's where I currently live. there was a young man sitting on the lawn, and I was with my coworker who was non-native. And I go, oh, I think that kid looks familiar. And she goes, yeah, that's probably one of your cousins, because I'm related to all the Pomos and Miwoks, right, Lorelle? And so as we went into the office later on, I got a call and they said, oh, there's a young man that wants to speak to you. And it was that young man that I saw. And I go out there and he sees me. He goes, hey, Dean. He goes, you remember me? And I looked at him. I said, oh, yes, it's been a while. He goes, well, I just got out and I just wanted to come by and so great to see you, because I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank you for when you did, when I was a young man, when you came and visited me and when you told me, never to give up, that I was worth something and that you cared about me and that you loved me. And man, I was just like, I got a little choked up, and I was like, it was one of, I guess they call it what, drop the mic moments, right? It's like, okay, my work's done. When you experience that, because a lot of times in the field of, mental health and behavioral health, the successes are, there's not, there's more failures, right? And so that's the reality. But just to have that experience towards the end of, that's why we do what we do, right? And so I did a lot of like work around, I worked at actually at treatment centers, Friendship House Association of American Indians. I did direct services counseling, did aftercare, I did groups, adults. I'm still doing, Zoom groups. I facilitate wellness talking circles, we call them. I don't know how many of you have heard of talking circles. And so that's a indigenous native approach, for healing and support. And I still do youth and adult circles, currently. And so, and like I said, culture for me, what I loved about our program, the Youth, it was based on the theme that culture is prevention, right? Culture is wellness, culture that offers so much, identity being the, one of the main ones, because, especially for young people, they need to know who they are and how they belong, what they're connected to, and again, and to strive to find, what their purpose is, and I try to model that. My model of life is to inspire and be inspired, and you could use that if you want. Hey. All right. And so you hear me saying, and so I'll say this, this is who I am. And I say, oh, whenever I acknowledge like my relatives, when they're sharing, that's what we do. We're say like giving thanks. We're acknowledging that thank you for that offering, right? And so, and like the other organization that I'm part of, like there's many of them. I'm too many. I'm the president of the board of the Marin, the Museum of American Indian here in Novato. And so I don't know how that happened, but Lorelle said I had to stay there till I get, back up. But I'm honored though, that I can serve, and also, so I have, back-to-back board meetings after this meeting. But I continue to, like, again, I don't talk about the culture, but it's something that I live, and I'm looking forward. We're actually going to have a gathering as our nonprofit. We were able to acquire some ancestral land in Nicasio just recently, 26 acres. And the significant thing about that, which we were somewhat, we were thinking about, how it had meaning, or that location, because we had been looking for land in Marin County, but it came down to Nicasio. And so, and I believe it's, an answer to a prayer. Found out that site is the actual ancestral village site of my grandmother's people. It's where my great grandmother Maria Copa was born. So yeah, it was wonderful. I remember when we met with our neighbors for the first time. It's so funny because one of the neighbors, I call him, I hope I can say his name. I'll just call him Uncle Ned. And he's like, why didn't you guys tell us you were moving here? I was like, whoa. I was like, I didn't get that memo. you know, and I asked the whole group, I asked, how many of you know what unceded land is? Not one person knew what that was. How many of you know what unceded land is? Okay, we're getting somewhere.
Mhm.
Okay. And so I shared what it was. And then, you know, there was more awareness, you know, because it's one thing if somebody doesn't know, but when you know what you didn't know, again, then guess what? Then you're responsible. Okay. And so, and I thanked them. I said, well, we're here, you know, we're here and thank you for taking care of our land, you know. And I say that in a good way, right? But, you know, again, I'm just glad I didn't have to speak about the Constitution because my view on that is not really, and I don't know if I can say it kindly as Teresa did, you know. Um, you know, no, I'm not gonna say it. We have all have our own perspectives, you know, of our experience, right? And the only thing I'll kind of end with is again, um, you know, don't assume anything about, you know, as indigenous and as Indian people, you know. And one of the things I learned too, again, going back in time is no matter what your level of education, you still have the opportunity to learn, even as educators, right? Um, you know, if you make the statement, they change that, right? Just take that out of your vocabulary. Indigenous, Indian, Native, whatever it is, how you're referencing our people. And we've come a long way, you know, and I think, you know, again, it's more than just, again, the experience of historical trauma. Right now, it's about, again, like Sister shared, you know, we're resilient. We are the prayers of our ancestors. We're the living prayers of our ancestors. And, you know, we're trying to make a difference for not just our own people, but the larger community, you know, to educate, you know, because there's some things that we can bring, that we can offer. And I think Lorelle and Lawrence might speak to that too. But I'm going to keep doing this until I can't do it anymore. I'm a traditional dancer, believe it or not, but I'm more transitioning into singing, you know. But if I had to dance, you know, I probably could, Lorelle.
I'm sure you could,
So
Dean.
thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dean, for your cultural humility and for also continuing to be in service to the community. We never really retire.
Yeah.
And well elder, that is something we all aspire to be, and certainly you embody that. And for your work with the community and bridging and helping with the healing is so important, and a testament to the voices today of resiliency in spite of the impact and legacy of colonization. Lawrence and I are going to take turns up here, and then we'll pivot to a final thought from each panelist on what are some steps that you all and the college can take, and then hear from you all some questions and thoughts, and hopefully continue an open channel of dialogue and community with you and with the students. So I want to kind of try not to jump around too much, but give a nutshell of some historical information to help you understand further than what has been shared, and also echo what has been shared, and keep in mind a focus around the Coast Miwok people and Pomo people, whose lands we are here on, and the tribe of the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, where that name came from and who we are as a political tribe, as a sovereign tribe, as a cultural people. I know there's some history teachers here, and there's probably some anthropological teachers, and I really think that it's important, especially to know that there's different ways of understanding and perspective when we're approaching, especially those topics. Really proud that our state has moved forward with really looking at the value of ethnic studies and really knowing that really came up from educators like yourself and from students and from communities that have historically been underrepresented. And those types of components that are added to opportunities of education and learning are so important, and to get that correct. For sharing with you about the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. As you heard, we're Coast Miwok and Pomo. We're a federation. We don't traditionally consider ourselves Pomo or Coast Miwok. That's an ethnographic term that was assigned to Indian people as we were being studied and being documented in ways in which we're grouped in terms of linguistics. We traditionally would identify and know each other through our ancestral villages, which were throughout this local area of Marin County. In fact, as mentioned earlier, you're on a cultural landscape. What does that mean? This is our culture. This is our way. This is our knowledge. This is our connection to Creator. This is what the songs and the dances and the prayers and our value system is predicated on a culture of reciprocity, which is deeply rooted to the land and to all things that are living. Our culture is predicated on not being the center of the world, but to be a part of it. Recognizing that every living thing has power and has purpose, and the sophistication of our ancestors through cultural and religious beliefs of song and dance that continues to happen today, as you've heard, is really based on understanding and practicing tradition from ancestral times. It's a testimony of survivorship. I'm going to start a little bit on Sir Francis Drake, partly because that's how I got here today on the boulevard, but also to understand that, Coast Miwok people were first sort of documented in a European Western sense when Sir Francis Drake landed out on the beach somewhere. And I say that because that's where an inner connection of worlds started to transition. And interpretation and othering began. It also would become a wave of migration and colonial settlement that would adversely impact my ancestors and my people. And with that, it's important to understand that that landing of Sir Francis Drake is one moment in time. And that's what we really know about Coast Miwok people, is really from that point of interaction. However, our ancestors had lived here upwards to 10 to 20,000 years. And I'm not going to argue what thousand of years that started, but a very long time, as we all say, since time immemorial. We have creation stories that tell us how and why Mount Tam exists, why and how and where our ancestors came from, that have survived through what has been upwards to a decimation in place of our ancestors from the point of contact from Drake through the Spanish, the Mexican, and American eras that were really highlighted with brutality, with violence, with dislocation, and removal of not just our ancestors from their homelands, but death through disease, through active campaigns of the federal and state government that had bounty on Indian people where they could be hunted and killed. It's been acknowledged by the Governor Gavin Newsom officially around 5 years ago, with the acknowledgement of the G word, that genocide happened in California. That is something that I think we're all, grappling with, and hearing the resiliency and the need for the resiliency comes from a history that is one of decimation in place, destruction of people, destruction of land and ecosystems. And we all share in this climate crisis now. So we understand that there is other ways in which we need to think about and engage with the land and with people. For the Coast Miwok people in this area of Sonoma and Marin County, has been upward reported that outside of Mexico, this was the most densely populated area of American Indian people. The diversity of nations and tribal people is unparalleled. And I think that's really important to understand because of today, my tribe, the Great Rancheria, we have upward of 1,600 tribal citizens who are enrolled. We do recognize and know that there are other lineal descendants who either chose not to be enrolled with the tribe or were not able to enroll at a time when the enrollment was open. So when you think about the numbers and impact, it's really remarkable that any of us actually are sitting here because we all are able to trace our genealogy largely through mission records to 14 survivors at the turn of the century. That information was pivotal and used in a time frame that I want to talk about, but it's important to recognize that the impact of settler colonialism was vast and real and has been documented, and that started on a fateful day with Drake Landing and became an opportunity that we saw to be exploited later on with the missionization system that was here right in San Rafael, where I have direct ancestors that lived and died and were enslaved there. And I know that not through oral tradition, but I know that through seeing mission records. It's something that I think all Native people understand, and it's important for you to reflect because in our educational system, oftentimes we're not having agency to really understand that authentic history. And oftentimes students are not getting that information until they come to a community college. And so you become workers of that amplify voices of people that have been unfortunately misrepresented or not given the facts. So definitely in a nutshell, the mission system was impactful with diseases and with a change of the landscape radically from the cows that were brought here and new floral and fauna that was invasive and impactful. We kind of jump forward to the Mexican era, which is another important place in time for us to really understand because we see with the missionization when it went into secularization that a lot of Native people who were forcibly taken into the mission partly for enslaved work, but in some cases people had sought some refuge in a mission simply because the conditions outside of the mission were unbearable. And, I cannot imagine to make a choice between the lesser of two evils. That said, with secularization, we moved into the Mexican era, which was a continuation, a bit of a very hostile environment, and also an othering of the local Native people, our ancestors. What had transpired during that time is really interesting because there were different large ranchos that were established through Mexican land grants that also became another circumstance in which survivorship of Coast Miwok people oftentimes were living and also enslaved in terms of being workers on those ranchos. And it also became an important moment in time to understand how our people were able to provide some survivalship through immense changes. And as we move on from the Mexican era, we move into the American period, which is important to note because that's where we saw another huge shift in impact. And our numbers are dwindling here. And yet you have families that remained in place, that never moved away, who lived on the margins of our ancestral lands, our relatives. And when you think about the discipline of people living in a place 10, 20,000 years, it takes a level of tenacity and preservation and perseverance in when you're actively going through an era of genocide. The American period in our statehood was another sort of tragic time. In fact, one of the first laws that was enacted was really kind of a weird name, Act for the Protection and of the Native Americans. And it really was the first legislation that then moved forward into legalized enslavement of men, women, and children of California Indian people. And then further, that was back through an act of Congress that funded monies to help for the actual bounty that was paid for hunting Native American people. And so it's important to understand that these are stories and facts that we may, as Native people, not have grown up knowing, but we've grown up having the effects of the trauma, having the effects of the othering. And it's important for us as a tribe today to share that and to teach that and to speak to that because it is how we're able to move forward and also look at where can we go in the future that makes positive changes. For Grayton, we reorganized in the early 1990s after a whole period of survivalship. And in the turn of the century, the federal government through the Bureau of Indian Affairs created a rancheria system here, which basically was mimicking other policy in other parts of the state, where oftentimes Native people were being moved from their Aboriginal lands, either through treaties or through agreements to reestablish, we'll put you here, but you just stay away from all this other area. In California, our history is similar and the law mimics that a bit, but it's a little more nuanced because of the Mexican and Spanish history that our statehood experienced. In 1906 through 1910, the federal government had an Indian problem and determined that most California Indians were landless or homeless. And there was an effort that was made through policy to create rancheria, small reservations. And that was predicated on some public and internal administrative efforts to address what was perceived as an Indian issue. We got to a point then where the tribe established a rancheria through the federal government in the township of Grayton. That rancheria became a nexus point and a hub for Indian people of a specific area, Sonoma and Marin primarily, Bodega Bay, Tamales, Marshall, Santa Rosa, to basically go to this land to live. It was a very small parcel. They did not provide you with resources to build or to develop. Many Native people didn't know that. There was no campaign, social media informed people, but Indian people did go there. at different times, and some people were able to live there permanently. That rancheria, as many rancherias in California was established, was based on Indian agents from the Bureau of Indian Affairs coming out in place to do a survey to see where Indian people were living. And what they saw was many Coast Miwok people living in Marshall and Tamales area, which you think about was really pushing out a lot of our families to the very fringe of community. My grandfather was one of the individuals who moved onto the Grayton Rancheria when my mom was a child, and built a small, a simple cabin with no electricity or running water. And that is, where many of our families went, even though it was ill funded and really inadequate for the population. Many families would come there in summertime. Many of our families had to go to different places to work. So it was not really a suitable place that was really addressing the issue. That rancheria system created a de facto recognition of a tribe. And with that became a nexus point for the federal government recognizing a group, a band of Indian people, a collection of survivors. And that's what happened up and down the state. That said, when years went by, we went through another dark period of history where the federal government said they were tired of these domestic dependent nations that they created through the rancheria system because they had a trust obligation to Indian people. And we have to keep in mind, in California, there were no treaties that were ratified. No lands were ceded, as mentioned earlier. There were 18 treaties negotiated. They were never enacted. They were held in secrecy for decades throughout time. And the rancheria system became another mechanism for creating Indian land, which was also very challenged because later in the 50s into the 60s, the federal government decided to do a Termination Act. And that was something that happened throughout the nation here in California, where the federal government basically said, you know what, we don't want to have this responsibility for you anymore. It's time you assimilate. The era that was happening was tribes from out of state were getting relocated. And assimilation was really the doctrine of federal Indian policy at the time. And what then became a mechanism for individuals that lived on Grayton Rancheria to basically be told, you can own your own land. You do not have to, write permission to the BIA to chop a tree down for firewood. People chose to elect to do termination without the full understanding, without the transparency, without the accurate information that would create waves and ripple effect that would devastate California Indians once again, because many of the rancherias that did terminate, and almost all of them in California did, because tribes did not get resources or agency from the federal government. And, wanting to have more agency for themselves, interpret the law that would allow for them to have ownership. That didn't include any provision for property taxes. It didn't include any provisions that were promised under termination for water systems, for healthcare, for other types of trade-offs that were being made through the termination process. That was completely not an informed consenting process for tribes. Many tribes chose that because of the reasons stated of wanting to be more without having that agency from tribes. I know for my grandfather, and I've seen letters he would write to the BIA asking, can we chop down trees for firewood? Could you please send out the local sheriff? People are harassing us and shooting at us. And so there was no recourse in those times. When termination happened, most of rancherias then went through an era where land was lost because there were no resources to pay for property taxes, and or there were unscrupulous people that were swindling land from Native people. My grandfather took out loans to pay for the property taxes and unfortunately wasn't able to retain all of the lands, but was able to maintain 1 acre, which is where I grew up and where my mom lives currently. For the tribe, that meant that in the 90s, we really basically reconnected in a way of tribal government, realizing that we were illegally terminated. Many tribes had gone through a resurgent and a revitalization and reformation, as well as the law. And for that, we then got busy in creating an opportunity to get our rights back, which was signed into law in 2000, December 27th. President Clinton, one of the last things he did, we were the last tribe to get restored, get our federal rights back through an act of Congress. And since that time, just in of getting our rights back, we have been actively involved in trying to address the needs of not just our tribal citizens through housing, healthcare, and education, but also to other tribal communities, our sister tribes, as well as being partners in a variety of different initiatives with the environmental community at a local and state level. I'm going to pivot over to Lawrence so he can share with you a little bit more about what we're doing today, and also speak to you about what the tribe's current mission is.
Sure. So from the time that we became restored, I was elected on the first council. So was Lorelle. And as the tribal leaders, we all looked at each other and asked, well, how do we do this? How do we lead a restored tribe? So we went off to a retreat and we reflected on the past, the history, and everything that had transpired up to that point. And we left there and we said, who do we stand for and what do we stand for? And the outcome of that retreat was, well, we stand for social and environmental justice. And we've stood by that since then. We focus internally on our citizenship. We govern according to our ratified constitution, bylaws. All of our programs are documented, passed through formal resolutions. Most of the time when establishing our own internal laws, we reflect on, of course, starting with Indian law, what federal laws are applicable to us, because not all federal laws apply to Indian tribes. Some are silent. And so in our decision-making, we really had to decipher, what was mandatorily required by us to do things a certain way, follow laws such as FIGR, the National Gaming Act. It actually stipulates every which way we could spend every dollar we take out of our business. And it has to go into certain programs and provide certain things. And so that allowed us to begin to establish internally departments for housing. When we became restored, our population of 1,500, I'll just use the analogy of a bell curve. So the bell curve for our tribe was no different than any other community. We had people homeless. We had people working class, barely making their rent. And then we had others that had excelled, 20, 60, 40. And that was what we were working up against. So we immediately took on tribal TANF, tribal assistance for needy families, to provide services to the greater community. And at that time, early on, some of our own citizens were eligible for those services. We've all evolved. We evolved into home buyer program. We don't buy a home per citizen. We work with them to help them become a homeowner through programs, support, financial management. We match down payment and we cover the closing cost.
Some of the other things that we're doing that I wanted to make sure that we noted for you today. And I think it's important to say that the tribe, from our restoration and getting our rights back, we we're able to tap into federal programs and services that are made available to those that are federally recognized. And so that is, once again, reestablishing that relationship, that government to government relationship that was severed through termination, that was established through the Rancheria system. Because we are a restored tribe and a federally recognized tribe, we through law have the opportunity to self-govern, and much of the federal laws now are about perpetuating self-determination for tribes. And so it gives a certain amount of autonomy for sovereign tribes to govern in a way without interference from the federal government. Because our mission is environmental stewardship and social justice, we encompass that beyond to be interpreted to Native and non-Native people, to our members and those that are not necessarily members of our tribe. One of the things that I am really proud of that our tribe and our leadership has done is that we endowed a scholarship to match and exceed what the university system did, the UC system did with their recent Native American Opportunity Program that does a tuition free for federally recognized Indians. We recognize, coming from being a tribe that lost our rights, that those there are Indian people in California that, because of the history that in some ways we shared today, don't fall into federally recognized tribes. So we stepped up and we endowed a scholarship at the UC system to fund full ride tuition to any California Indian person who is not federally recognized. And so there is a pathway for those that are not technically on a federal registered Indian tribe to be able to get their education. We recognize that education comes in different ways, but a higher education degree is really sort of the modern way in which Indian people do create opportunity and change in our own community, because oftentimes we go out with a degree and we come back to our community. And here at the College of Marin, in 2003, we endowed a community scholarship for Native American students. And so we were really honored to be able to meet you, Christina Garcia, who's a recipient, and hopefully encourage and see more students to take advantage of that. We are able to offer these things because we did make a hard decision years ago to do a casino development. Tribes are not given a lot of opportunity or resources for economic development. We early on looked at doing a cheese factory, doing anything that was yet a casino. However, we had no land, we had no capital, we had our rights restored, and we were starting from scratch. Our vision was to do something that would be beneficial to all Native and non-Native people. And we put our money where our mouth is through our actions. And we will continue to do that, uplifting through education, environmental stewardship. We have co-management agreements with county regional parks and with National Seashore. We do a lot of work as the federally recognized tribe on protection of sacred sites, ancestral remains, and cultural resources, partly here on the campus, as well as all in Marin County. You may not see us actively doing that work because it's sensitive and confidential information, but we're out there. And I think that's been a thread to pull through all of the panels is not only are we still here, we are thriving, we are surviving, we're engaging, and we're educating. each other and you, and hopefully that next generation of students. So I just want to conclude there because we're right up to the time. And so if we all can just take a moment to just appreciate all of the voices, your attention, and I'm willing to entertain questions. And again, I just really want to also acknowledge and appreciate Professor BigEagle and for President Eldridge for really being brave and creating a safer space on the campus here for Native people to be visible, to be heard. I, as a representative for my tribe, have been engaging with the College of Marin for years on various issues, mostly cultural resources. What's happened today is something to mark in your calendar and your history book, because this level of agency and platform that you're giving to Native voices has not happened. So let that be the first of many opportunities, and let you all who listened in and your attention here be a part of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey. Hey. We don't have too much time, but we could take one or two questions if somebody has a question in their mind or heart that they want to broach. Anybody? Yeah, in the back. Yeah.
Sounds like a dean.
What? I'm like, what?
I think maybe there's a lot of ways it can happen. So just be in touch and think about connecting with us at certain points along. Dance and music has always been part of way human beings pass on culture. And I think there's a lot, when I look at this panel, I realize that we're all one human family. But when we have 5 people here, we represent 22 different tribes that I counted that we that we talked about. So the diversity of our communities are very important to us. I think maybe dance, we have big times and we have powwows. My thought is, why doesn't College of Marin have a powwow? Many colleges have powwows. So that's my goal. That's a goal I see coming, or maybe a big time powwow. If there's some way of combining the two, they're different music, different sounds, different things, but they're all worship in many ways. They're prayer. They're not entertainment, they're prayer. One more question.
Oh, we have a mic.
Shoot.
Thank you.
Serious.
Yeah.
I know we're really close to time. I know there's a conversation happening and has been for a while about land acknowledgement becoming kind of performative. And I'm wondering what your comments are in terms of helping us to do it right.
So I'll start, and then I'm going to punt over to Teresa. But we, from Great Rancheria, as the federally recognized tribe of the area, had began some consultation with the administration last spring around what that could look like in terms of a meaningful way. And I think, one thing I'll say about land acknowledgement, I think acknowledgement is really important. I think as human beings, being in right relationship with land is important, but also respecting and understanding the visibility for the living tribal people is tied to that. And I think a land acknowledgement is an appropriate pathway, but there has to be action and implementation and meaningful ongoing elements that get incorporated and woven into the organization that or institution that wants to do a land acknowledgement. We get rote in the way that we do things as people and organizations. So we have to really stay present and engaged in that. I do really appreciate that Redbud Resource does a lot of work, as do we. around making that process more important. So I'll just punt to you if you want to share anything further, Trey Lasso.
Yeah, not too much more to elaborate on, we do have November Going Beyond Land Acknowledgement public training coming up. So go check out our website and sign up if you're interested in learning more, getting into the nitty gritty. But there's just a couple things to consider when you're creating a land acknowledgement. One, why is there a need for a land acknowledgement? And that will lead you to create a well-researched, respectful land acknowledgement. And also, who are land acknowledgements for? I'll tell you, they're not for Native people. I'll just give you the answer. They're for you guys. They're for non-Native people to help understand the history of the place that you live and work, right? So go sign up for our Going Beyond Land Acknowledgements class. I'll also recommend nativeland.ca, native-land.ca. They have a teacher's guide. They talk a little bit more about land acknowledgements and that too.
To me, a land acknowledgement always means that the organization has made an effort to contact the local people and to make a connection before that acknowledgement even happens in a public way. I mean, that's essential. And that was part of what I was trying to do here today. I want to thank our librarians who brought some wonderful books for you to check out if you're interested in further interest. David and Sarah, and President Aldridge, thank you so much for your support. It made a great difference. Thank you for coming. I think we have a lot to offer, and connection is the key. But think good thoughts as you go through your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.